I'm Hemant Mehta, and I'm flying solo today, and you're listening to the podcast for FriendlyAtheist.com. You can now listen to all of our episodes and see show notes at FriendlyAtheistPodcast.com. And by the way, we now have merchandise shop on the website, so if you want your podcast swag, and you know you do, go to our website and click on the store tab. Jeffrey Tayler is the author of several books all about different parts of the world, but you may know him best for his wonderful articles defending atheism and atheists and criticizing the religious right on Salon.com. He's also the Russia correspondent for The Atlantic. His latest book is called Topless Jihadis, Inside Femin, the world's most provocative activist group. Jeffrey, thanks so much for joining me. Absolutely. Okay, so let's get this Salon thing out of the way right now. The website seems to have this reputation for publishing so many anti-atheist articles, and it seems like all you have to do to get published there is write something that says like, oh, Sam Harris is an asshole, and they'll print it. It seems like, and you're like the one glowing exception to that rule. So what's the relationship between you and Salon? What goes on behind the scenes there? Why do they publish so many of those articles?
Well, I don't know why they don't publish more articles along the lines of what I've been publishing, but I started writing for them actually back in the 90s and maintained something of a relationship with them during those years. But I began writing about religion for Salon after, in response to a takedown of Richard Dawkins, as I recall. This was a few years ago. And basically what I see is that very few people offer the perspective that I've been offering. And to me, that seems to be the answer. I don't have any answer for why that is, except that there's still such a long-standing prejudice against speaking forthrightly about religion because people take that as offensive. And I also think that part of the reason there are fewer articles similar to the ones I write is because the fierce antagonism and hate mail and hate tweets that ensue after almost each of my articles are I think pretty common. So there's a lot of disincentive out there to not write about religion.
What is the feedback you get to those articles? Is it overwhelmingly positive from commenters and people tweeting, sending you emails, or do you get a lot of backlash for them?
No. As I just said, it's mostly negative. I have people who are recognizing the truth of what I'm saying or defending me, but I think they're becoming more, honestly. I'm not exactly sure if I can quantify that, but for the most part, the reactions are depressing for a rationalist because what I'm dealing with, I'm writing to mostly an American audience, and seeing the amount of hate thrown my way could make me despair, except that the numbers show that the religiously non-affiliated are increasing in number, not decreasing. And so I take it as being more an outlash, a slap back at from people who are losing rather than from people who are on the winning side, and therefore could be more confident and ignore any kind of attacks on their religion.
So when you write about these articles or you're criticizing the religious right, yes, the demographics are changing. Does it ever occur to you, like, why is it so hard to convince people that, atheists aren't trying to force atheism down your throat, or that, the religious right is actually bad for a lot of people who will go on to support them? Do you ever wonder, like, why is it so hard to convince people of what seems to be so obvious?
I don't know. I think that for part of the reason that I just stated, that people are afraid to criticize religion, a lot of people grow up just believing that expressions of religious faith cannot be touched in any way, cannot be critiqued or criticized in any way. And so they go on in a bubble of sorts, but it's a bubble that obviously absorbs most Americans and most people across the globe. It's nowhere easy or acceptable necessarily to criticize religion. But religion, we should remember, it is just one more idea a bad idea, one more explanation of who we are and how we got here, and it's the wrong explanation. So it has to be critiqued, and the more people point that out, the better for us all.
Now, you said you started writing for Salon at least, a few years ago with regards to all of this religion stuff, even if you wrote for them before. But you made your reputation as a travel writer, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I've been living abroad most of my adult life. So when I started writing, I've written 7 books now, and 6 of them are on are related to travel and history and culture, places that I've spent time in. But for me, religion has always been an important issue, both because of the way it's affected my family, and also because traveling and living in Muslim countries, for instance, or in very Christian places, religion would come up as a matter of conversation. And I got a heavy indoctrination, both of evangelical Christianity at one point in my life, and I was in the Peace Corps in Morocco, so I saw life in Muslim countries firsthand, not just in Morocco, but I've been all over the place in the Muslim world. So the travel and life experience has helped shape my views on religion.
Have you been anywhere where your atheism has put you at risk at all?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I suppose now it certainly would. I mean, I did a book, maybe it was my 3rd or my 4th, I can't remember which, called Angry Wind. And I traveled across the Sahel, which is Muslim Black Africa, from Chad to Senegal, and that's through now Boko Haram territory. But and I did that in 2003 or 4. Can't quite remember, but basically that was right after September 11th, and it was clear in Nigeria that something like Boko Haram, which was being born around that time, but I didn't know about it, could take place because there was so much hostility between Muslims and Christians in the north where I was for that trip. So if I had professed myself an atheist then to the people who I was talking with, I think it would have been unpleasant, nothing more. But now obviously, I imagine it could be life-threatening.
Do you hide the fact that you're an atheist now when you travel?
No. But I find it strange. I was in Morocco a couple of months ago for a couple of weeks, and I found it really notable that no one brought up religion. This is in contrast to when I was living there in the 80s and early 90s. When everybody was talking about religion and people were very aggressive about trying to persuade non-Muslims to accept Islam. And I noticed that no one did this time. And I wonder, but I have no proof of it, that maybe the Moroccan security services are monitoring people and people are afraid of being mistaken for Islamists of some sort. I don't know. But otherwise, I've been to Turkey recently, and no one brought it up there either, although Islam is certainly resurgent, at least in the government of Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
So let's talk about your traveling for a bit, because you don't go to places, like you said, you're traveling through the Muslim part of Africa. You're not exactly going to tourist spots here. What's the fascination with going to places that are well off the popular path? You're going on the obscure, maybe dangerous places. What's drawing you to all that?
Well, I've been, you might know I've been living in Russia for the past 23 years, and I was a Russophile as a teen, and I was always interested in going places that, not necessarily going places, I was always interested in peoples with whom we had conflicts. It happens to be that those were, at the time, the Soviet Union and communist countries of Eastern Europe and Muslim countries, although the conflict in those years was much, much less pronounced than it is now. And so that fascinated me, and I wanted to know why. But I do go to if you could call them tourist places. And I spend part of the year in France usually, and go to Italy often. And I've studied in Italy and Spain, and it's not really a question for me of trying to go someplace remote. It's a question of pursuing my interests wherever they happen to be, even if they're in a dangerous country or a remote country.
And what are your interests now when it comes to traveling? Is it just
Well,
going to some place we're in conflict with, or is it something else?
I'm sorry.
Is it simply going to different nations that we're in conflict with, or is there something else drawing you to those particular places?
Well, it depends on what I'm writing about. So I did a story for National Geographic the year before last on the refugee flows coming across the Mediterranean into Libya. So I went down to Sicily and went to Lampedusa, the island that's very close to North Africa, where a lot of them at one time were arriving, but no longer. That took me there. It really depends on what I'm interested in doing. I don't have any general approach. If something comes, I generally try to go places where I speak the language. In fact, that's pretty much the only sort of place I deal with, because I don't work with translators. I always go and hear things hear what people tell me in their own language, which I haven't just studied since I speak several languages. And that's important to me for authenticity's sake. But I'm usually following themes for a long, long time. And now that I've spent so many years of my life writing, so basically I wouldn't say that I have any plan. A few years ago, there was a mayor in southern Spain who, Spain was extremely hard hit by the financial crisis there, as you know, I think. And there was a mayor who was a leftist who was organizing raids on supermarkets because people were hungry in the southern province where he lives. That was interesting to me, so I went there and did a story for Business Week on that. For instance, I covered Enrique Capriles' campaign against Hugo Chavez for Business Week a couple of years ago before Chavez died. All these things came up as a result of things I've been reading about, and I spoke to my editors, and they sent me off to do stories.
So let me get back to some of the things you've been writing about then for Salon recently. When it comes to the new atheists, Bill Maher, Richard Dawkins, or at least the popular atheists, what do you think it is that the general public doesn't get about them? Because they get such a negative reaction when you bring up their names in certain circles. What do you think most people don't know about them or don't get about them?
I don't think that there's a question of not getting. I think it's in fact that people get it quite clearly, that as I was saying, that people feel they're on the losing side of an argument, and they're lashing out at those who point this out. I don't understand some of the animosity, especially towards Sam Harris, for instance. I think it's irrational, and it's been promoted in a way that's physically dangerous for him even. But in the case of the others, I think the gist of it is that, Sam Harris is very good at logically, rationally, and calmly pointing out the foibles of the religious, most notoriously, of course, of Muslims, and with the jihad violence and whatnot through his podcast. But I think people understand that. I think they see that he's right, and rather than engage him, in particular with Sam Harris, on the merits of his arguments, they just prefer to attack. So I think believers feel themselves besieged, and they know that they really do, I think in some sense, have some kind of doubt. And rather than deal with a doubt, which would mean that maybe they're doing the wrong thing once a week, if they go to the church on Sundays or go to the mosque several times a day, rather than deal with that, they lash out. And we have this idea that certain beliefs, religious beliefs, can't be criticized, and people take advantage of that. So if you criticize a religious idea, which is nothing more than a bad idea, a mistaken, misinformed idea, people say, well, that's bigoted. But in fact, what you're doing is just engaging in free speech, which is what we need.
And flipping to the other side of that, what do you think will be the impact of religion on the current American elections?
Well, I think it's very strong right now, of course. So You have Donald Trump, as you know, probably he spoke recently at Liberty University, which was Jerry Falwell's university, if you could call it that. I mean, but in any case, even Donald Trump, who clearly, I don't believe believes in anything religious at all, but he's trying to get the evangelical vote, and it's working. So he made it. He delivered a speech in which he basically said about 5 words about God and the Bible, and then went on to do his usual stump speech. But the point is, people that I'm not at all sure that all the students at Liberty University are avid believers. I don't know exactly what the story is there, but what is clear is that he knew he had to say a few things religious to get their support, and he seemed to get it. And he's done this before, and he's now leading, or he has been leading Ted Cruz among the evangelicals. And this is only because he's made some very obvious panderings to believers without demonstrating it in any way in his life that he believes. I don't think that Trump really, my impression is that he did not give religion much thought.
Right.
It will just not enter into the life of a billionaire real estate mogul, living in New York very much.
As we're talking, there was a survey that came out the day we're taping this that actually said when it comes to most Americans thinking about political candidates, Donald Trump is actually seen as the least religious candidate, even less religious than Bernie Sanders. And yet he's the one who seems to have evangelicals eating out of his hands. So what do you think is going on there in terms of, you have so many Republican candidates saying the right things to the evangelical base, Ted Cruz, Ben Carson at a time, Mike Huckabee for sure, and yet evangelicals are flocking to a guy like Trump who screws up when he tries to pander to them. And like you said, I think he gives off this impression that he really isn't religious. He doesn't really care about it. Why are they so drawn to him as opposed to these other candidates?
Well, my guess would be that people are angry. A lot of people are angry in the United States, and especially the evangelical group that constantly feels besieged and constantly complains about being under attack, and that Trump expresses that anger pretty accurately. And I think we have to take that anger seriously. I don't think it's crazy. I think it's mostly as a result of economic policies that go back to the Clinton years, to NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and other things which have left people without futures, closed factories around the country, shifted factories and other production abroad, and leaving a lot of people, especially those without any education or with less education, and very often white people, very often evangelicals, without much of a future. And Donald Trump speaks to that. And I think we have to, and I think that's why Bernie Sanders is also doing so well now, or at least at the time we're recording this. And I think that all he has to do is make some sort of pro forma declaration that he says the Bible is his favorite book, or he actually, in a story I've been writing, he said the Bible, The Art of the Deal is a second to the Bible. So he promotes his own book, and then says the Bible is the first book.
He can't bring up the Bible unless he mentions his own book too.
Yeah, right. I mean, he's clearly promoting himself, and successfully as far as at this point. And I think all he has to do is make a pro forma declaration, and people, they really are reacting to the anger he's expressing about America always losing, as he puts it, or always getting the bad end of every deal, as he puts it. He never explains what the deals were, probably because I'm not sure that his audience is necessarily going to remember that NAFTA was a brainchild of the Reagan and Bush 1 presidencies that Clinton brought in. I mean, those things go back a long way, and their effects have been disastrous on the economy. And so people are turning to something they know, religion. And so most of the Republican contenders have been these hard right religious folk like Ted Cruz and Huckabee and others.
I understand the anger and that people want to go with someone who, they think is a winner because he keeps saying he's a winner. I'm just surprised, I think, that evangelicals would vote for someone who clearly, to me anyway, doesn't have their best interests at heart. I mean, I don't see Donald Trump as a guy who's going to say, yeah, let's ban abortions. Let's, reinstate a gay marriage ban. Ted Cruz talks about doing that sort of stuff all the time, and Donald Trump doesn't. I'm very curious why evangelicals would vote for someone, even out of anger, who doesn't seem to have their best interests at heart. That's surprising to me.
Yeah, it is to me too. I mean, but ever since Donald Trump appeared on the political scene this time, I mean, if you remember, before then he was in the birther wave, trying to prove Obama wasn't born in the United States, and people sort of dismissed him. And then he decided not to run last time. And this time, when he said he was going to run, people here in Russia were asking me, "Well, does he have a chance?" And I'd saying, "Oh no, Donald Trump doesn't have a chance." Well,
yeah.
he's proved everybody wrong at every turn, and it's just astonishing. It really is. He's a phenomenon. And think of Donald Trump as anything. I mean, I've known about him all my life, pretty much, as just a flamboyant real estate mogul, and nothing more. I mean, the guy who was in the news for big buildings and crazy statements and beautiful wives and things. And I never thought of him as anything like a demagogue or anybody who could stir crowds up as much as he does. I could have named 50 things I thought Donald Trump would be, and that would not have been one of them.
Right. Yeah, I think he's surprising everybody. I have one last question for you. So your latest book is called Topless Jihadis. What is it about that group, Femin, and I hope I'm pronouncing their name correct, but what is it about their brand of activism that you think is effective or not effective? And what is it that draws you to what they do?
Well, as I told you, I've been living in Russia, and Femin is not in Russia, but they were in Ukraine, just to the south. And when they appeared, there was some publicity about their various acts down in Kiev, and I thought that was interesting. But then what really got me excited about the group was that they explicitly target religion and explicitly target the patriarchy that religion, that in this case Christianity, is based on. And so it was really their attitude towards religion that got me interested. And then I began to write about them and traveled south, and then they moved, as you probably know, one of the most prominent Femin leaders sawed down a cross overlooking Kiev's Independence Square, and she was threatened by the president of Ukraine at the time, and she fled to Paris. And that's where the group has really taken off. And the thing that interests me most is that they're explicitly drawing the connection between religion and oppression, and religion and the oppression of women. And they've also included Islam in this, and so they live under threat. It's been very dangerous for them. So that's what's interested me.
And do you think their form of activism where it's kind of almost a shock value, where they protest topless and make these claims, do you think that, obviously they're getting attention for that, but do you think that's an effective way to create change, that the type of change they want to create?
Well, what they're trying to do is get people to pay attention. And they knew that people would pay attention to half-naked women. And so they never just go out and there's always a message written on their bare bodies. Mm-hmm. And the message is the slogan indicating the message they're trying to give. So the point is they're trying to point out injustices, or point out the failures of religion or the evils of religion. And I think their aim is to start a conversation, and they certainly have done that. And you can certainly see that by the fierce reaction from the French, especially the French far right, which is Catholic, and Islamists in France and elsewhere. So I think it's effective in starting a conversation, and that's what the group is about. It's about starting a conversation. So it's not about positing solutions at this point, but they've done a lot to show how deadly serious people of faith take any kind of questioning, especially Muslims, and in France, especially Catholics. And they've done a good job of that, and that's what they've been trying to do.
Well, Jeffrey Tayler, thank you so much for your time, and we'll have links to your articles in the show notes. Keep up the good work. We enjoy reading you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the podcast for FriendlyAtheist.com. This episode was taped at Cinnamon Sound Studios in Aurora, Illinois. The music was composed by Brad Chagdis. If you like what you're hearing, please consider making a contribution at patreon.com/Hemant, that's He-Man T. We appreciate your support. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us at friendlyatheistpodcast@gmail.com. I'm Hemant Mehta, and I hope you'll join us next time.